Hi there folks, in today's demonstration I'm going to show you how you can calculate the score of a Microsoft Forms submission in Power Automate. So if you've ever built a flow using the Microsoft Forms trigger and the getResponseDetails action, you'll have noted that if we look at this particular example here that you get only the responder, the submit date, and then the various questions and answers. There's nothing in there to indicate if they've got 100%, 0% or somewhere in between, so it makes it very difficult for you to build out logic to send them a congratulations email or maybe a commiserations email to say that you have to go and sit that questionnaire or quiz once more, go away and study and come back later. So in today's video I'm going to show you how we can calculate that score using just a handful of actions in Power Automate. So to kick off our understanding, I've put this flow into test mode, and if we jump across onto Microsoft Forms, I have a quiz, do you know Power Platform? So in that quiz we have a total of 7 questions, of which one of them is not a scored question, what is your name? And then we have either a single choice question, of which there are 5, or right at the very bottom I have a multi-choice question, and of course there's an added level of complexity in order to calculate the score of a multi-choice. I've also added different points to this quiz, and these points don't come through in Power Automate, but I'll also show you how to extend the flow to include points if that's something that you want to do also. So if I put this form into preview mode and complete the form, my name is Damo, and we can answer some of these questions. So the primary purpose of Power BI is in fact for business intelligence and data visualization. Which component of the Power Platform is used to automate tasks and workflows? Well, if I got that wrong, I would be hanging up my boots on YouTube. So it's Power Automate. What is Power Apps primarily used for? So it's building those custom business apps. Which Power Platform component allows you to create chatbots? Well, it was recently rebranded. It's now Copilot Studio, previously Power Virtual Agents. And then in Power Platform, what is Dataverse used for? Well, I'm not sure. I think it's to store and manage data securely, but let's get this one wrong and say it is to create visual reports. And then finally I have a multi-choice, and what are your favorite products? Well, of course I'm biased, but this is multi-choice, so we're going to go with Power Automate and Power Apps, and if I submit that and then view my results, I can see I've got 100 out of 120. I've pretty much got all the answers correct, but sadly, as expected, I got question 6 wrong. So if I jump over into Power Automate, we can see that flow is completed. Again, if I pop open that getResponseDetails and look at that raw output, we can see all the various answers that we've given. Each of these answers are strings, and so it's worth just acknowledging that these are strings here. If you're building this yourself, make sure that you become aware of what these strings contain, because this is incredibly important. If your answers have additional spaces in them, then this solution needs to be amended, and I'll share that later on. But also note here, this is the multi-choice. This is also a string, but actually it is JSON. So it's a stringified JSON, and we can convert this back into JSON and use it to our advantage, rather than using all sorts of funny techniques and replacing the square brackets in order to get the text out of there. Now at the end of the flow, there's a create item, and it creates an item with the score. In this case, it's 83.3333%. And if I bring up my calculator, remember I got 5 out of 6 correct, so 5 divided by 6 gives us 83.3333. So based on the number of answers, we have got a valid percentage of answers correct. But of course I want to also be able to calculate the score. But before I do that, let's go and have a look at how this flow has been built. So starting from the top, still in the history, when a response is submitted, we then get the response details, and then I have a compose. And in that compose, whilst it's nicely displayed on the screen right now, I have an object. Now an object is just a curly bracket at the start and a curly bracket at the end, and then key and values. So the keys are the answers, A1, A2, A3, all the way down to A6. And then the values are strings. So in this case, the correct answer, and it has to be in the same case as well. So Power Automate, building custom business apps, etc. You'll note that for A6, I have an array. And when we have a look at this in edit mode, it'll make a bit more sense. Then I have another compose that does an answer check. And you'll see that this is an array. And in this array, we have objects with keys that are answers and values that are Boolean, either true or, as we get down to the 5th one here, false. So this is based on a calculation. We're checking strings to see if they match. If they match, we know they've got the correct answer. If they don't match, then we insert a false, and we can use that then to calculate the percentage. I'm going to skip the next action because I'm just primarily going to use this for explaining how multi-choice works, because it is slightly more complex. And then onto the filter array, what I'm doing is I'm taking the input that includes all of the answers with Boolean true or false, and then I am performing a condition where the answer is equal to true. So at the bottom now we can see that we only have 5 answer trues, which means we know we have 5 correct answers and 6 original questions and answers, and therefore when we come down to the composed percentage, I'm just doing a simple calculation of 5 divided by 6, which is 83.33%. So the history sounds straightforward enough. What does that look like when the flow is being built? So in the compose correct answers, we have that object. You'll see the curly brackets at the start and the finish there. And then I have these key value pairs. So A1 all the way down to A6. Those are my correct answer values. And then I have a semicolon to separate that. And then in double quotes, I have a string of the correct answer. And this is where the answer has to be identical, because we're going to check this string against the string that is returned from the Microsoft form. So if you get unusual results when you're building this, the first thing to do is to check the history, make sure that the get response details is returning exactly the same string as you have defined in this object. Now the only other one to call out is answer 6, because it's multi-choice, because it is an array of data. You'll note that there are no opening double quotes and no closing double quotes. This is an array with a square bracket at the start, a square bracket at the end, and then comma separated we have Power Apps and Power Automate, because those are the 2 correct answers. The other thing to call out, if you're new to JSON, make sure you have a comma after each of these key value pairs, and make sure you also don't have one at the very end here after your last key value pair, or if I insert one and jump out, you'll see that I get an error, enter a valid JSON. So if I remove that last comma, we now have valid JSON again. So with our answers set up in this object, it allows us to query them by their name. So answer 1, answer 2, answer 3, etc. And we then have our compose answer check. So this is built as an array. You'll see it's got an opening square bracket, a closing square bracket, and then we have objects, which are these squiggly brackets here, for each of the answers based on questions 1 through to 6. And then for each of them, we have an expression. And that expression is checking to see if the output from compose correct answers, which is that object that I've just shown you, with a question mark and A1 in this case, that will get us the answer 1 string, does it equal the body response details and the specific question from Microsoft Forms. So if I were to jump into the dynamic content, all I've done here is I've scrolled down to find the first question. And the first question is, what is the primary purpose of Power BI? So if I was to select that, you'll see that it's overwritten with this body get response details and then this ID. And that's how a Microsoft Form answer is retrieved dynamically in Power Automate. So if I open up a few more of those expressions, you'll see that all I'm updating here is A2 for answer 2, and of course the correct answer, because we want to compare that string for answer 2 against the correct answer. And similarly, if I go to 3, we have answer 3, and if I go to answer 5, it's answer 5. And of course, again, updated this expression so it pulls the correct answer from the Microsoft form. Now, if we jump into our final answer, which is based on the multi-choice within the Microsoft form, you'll see that, again, I'm using equals, but this time I have the output of A6, but sorted, because this is an array of answers that I provided for the Microsoft form, and by sorting it, it'll ensure that those answers are in strict ascending order. Then if we have a look at the response that comes back from the Microsoft form, the body of the get response details and that lovely ID, I'm wrapping it in JSON, and the reason that I'm doing that is the answers that come back are actually stringified, and so by using the JSON expression it turns that into valid JSON. And then you'll see that I'm also using sort. So by using sort, that'll ensure that the answers that come back are also in the same strict ascending order, and we're therefore comparing like for like, two sorted arrays in the same ascending order, and of course if the same answers exist in the correct answers A6 key as does the response that comes back from the Microsoft form, then we'll get true, otherwise we'll get false. Now if I jump into the Compose multi-choice explained, you'll see that I have different case, different order, and same case, same order. And so if we jump into different case, you'll see that I have a slightly more complex expression here, but again it's a sort, but rather than it being based on answer 6, it's based on an array that I've created, and in that array I've ensured that both Power Apps and Power Automate have got lowercase letters. So what I'm doing here is demonstrating that even if I have an assorted array for both the original array and the array of data that comes back from the Microsoft form, if the case is different, the Microsoft form has got uppercase P and A for both of those Power Apps and Power Automate, but my correct answer has got lowercase p, this will evaluate as false because the comparison of strings is based on the same case, and that applies to also the values within an array. The other thing to bear in mind is the sort. So I mentioned that it was important to make sure that both of these arrays were in strict order. I have sorted the first one, the answers of A6. I've also sorted the responses from the Microsoft form, but then I've reversed the answers on the Microsoft form in order to demonstrate that I will get a false even if they select both the same answers as the correct answer. And then finally, just based on the same expression that we had in the action above, it's based on the sort of A6 and the sort of the JSON from the Microsoft form, and of course that will give true. And we'll have a look at this later on in the flow history when I run the flow. So with that optional compose covered, if we have a look at the filter array, what we're doing here is we're taking the output from our answer check, which of course is our array of answers, and then I've just simply constructed an expression, which is the item, open close brackets, question mark, square brackets, and then in single quotes, answer is equal to true. And if it's equal to true, then of course it will remain in this filter array. In the compose percentage, I've got a wee sum, and that sum is based on converting, first of all, the length of the filter array. So if we get 5 correct answers, then the length will return 5 objects, so it will therefore return a length of 5. I convert that into a float, which then allows me to divide that float, which is 5, by the length of our original compose answer check array. So by checking the original array that will have all of those 6 answers with all of those conditions to see if they're true or false, we know that there'll be 6 answers, therefore we're simply dividing 5 by 6 and then of course multiplying it by 100, and that gets us our percentage. When it comes to creating an item, all I've done is insert their name, which is one of the responses, into a list with the output of the compose for the percentage, just so I can see what their score is. So with that logic covered, what I'd like to do now is to introduce some points into this. And so where I'd introduce points is in the answer check. So at the moment I have just an answer and a true or a false, but what I'd like to do is insert a points. And if I put in a comma and then in double quotes insert points like so, I can insert a numeric value. So in this case I'll say this one here is worth 10 points. Now to speed things up, if I then highlight all the way up to that comma and Control C with my keyboard, I can paste that across all of the objects, and at the moment all of these are going to be allocated 10 points. Now to make things interesting, I'm just going to increase the number of points from 10 to 20 to 30 and 40 and 50, and then for the last one I'll give them 100 points. So out of all the points that are available here, we've got 250 points that can be earned based on the number of points that I've allocated per question. What this then allows us to do is when we do our filter array where the answer is equal to true, that will of course return all the answers that are true and therefore all of the points in the array where you've got the correct answer. Then what we need to do is to sum those points up to not only get our percentage but also get the number of points scored. And whilst there are more efficient ways of doing this, I'm going to use and apply to each and I will initialize a variable, and we will just increment the variable by the number of points. So my apply to each is going to be based on the body of the filter array. I do need to initialize a variable, so I'm going to add in a variable, and I'll choose initialize variable. We'll call this points, we'll set it to integer, the initial value is 0, and then in our apply to each, what we're going to do is we are going to increment our variable. So here we are, increment variable, the variable is points, and the value that we're going to increment by, because we're in this apply to each loop, and because I've defined the value of the points to be equal to points, in the increment variable, I can create an expression, go into fx, choose dynamic content. If we scroll right to the bottom, you'll see current item, which is the current item in this apply to each loop. But I want to get the points value here by inserting points in the single quotes and the square brackets and the question mark. And if I add that, that will now allow us to calculate the number of points that a user has correctly scored. In order to check that we've got the correct number of points, if I add in an action here in the form of a compose, we can simply just output the value from our variable, and we'll be able to see our point score in our compose points. And I'll go ahead and publish this, and we can save and then test. And so for those of you that are eagle-eyed, you might have noticed that rather than a save and a test, I actually have a save draft and a publish and then a test. So this flow has been built as a solution, and this is a new feature that's just arrived in Power Automate. So if it's not something you're familiar with, it's literally just arrived. It allows me to save drafts, it allows me to check the version history, and you can see some of the different versions I've been creating in the build up to producing this video. But it then allows me to finally publish and then ultimately test that flow. So I'll put the flow into manual. I'll jump back across onto that Microsoft form. We'll go with my name. In terms of the answers, let's see if I can get as many of them wrong as possible, but I'll get the last two right because that'll score me 150 points. So this is very difficult, getting it wrong. What is Power Apps used for? Chatbot creation. Where do we create chatbots? Is Power Apps. And in Power Platform, what is Dataverse used for? So this is one I need to get correct. So to store and manage data securely. And then my favorite products, of course, are Power Automate and Power Apps. If I submit that back onto my flow, which is run successfully, if we have a look at the filter array, we can see all these points. We can see I got question 1 wrong, question 2 wrong, 3 wrong, 4 wrong, but then I got 5 and 6 correct because we've got true and true. Remember, the input to the filter array is the output of our answer check. But then if we look at the output of our filter array, it's doing a check to see where the answer is equal to true. We only now have those two answers, which is 50 and 100. And then if we go into our apply to each loop, that apply to each loop is looking at the body of the filter array. In this case, the two objects that we've got here, it is incrementing that variable by 50 in the first loop and then by 100 in the second loop. And if we look at the composed points, we can see I scored 150 points. And if we look at the percentage, it'll be 2 over 6. If we look at that output, 2 over 6 is a third, so 33.33. I got 2 answers correct from the 6 questions. Now, the only final piece that I'd like to add is just a condition branch. We'll add in a condition, and we can send a different email depending on whether or not you scored above the required percentage. So we're going to check if the output of the composed percentage is greater than 80%, because I'm mean and you have to do extremely well if you want to pass. If it is, we can send and add an action, and we can send an email, and that send email can be based on the user that completed the form. So we can have a look for the responder's email. We can say congratulations to them, because of course if we're going down the left hand side, which is true, they've passed, and we can say you have passed with flying colors, your score was, and if we use the dynamic values, we can insert the percentage and put a percentage sign afterwards with a total of however many points. So we can go that many points. And then if we look at the left-hand side, I'm actually going to use a right-click, copy that action into here and paste the action. And then we have a copy of that send email action. And unfortunately, I'm going to say commiserations. This is where I need to check my spelling. You have not passed on this occasion. Your score was blah, 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 with a total of blah, blah, points. And so we have both the congratulations email and the commiserations email based on the result of your Microsoft Form quiz submission. So with the flow built, if I put it into test mode, I can jump across into my form that I've already pre-completed with demo fail. I know that I've got, I think, 2 of these correct, and I've also chosen 3 of the favorite products. So of course that's incorrect also. If we submit that, jump back onto our flow, and if we go very much to the bottom, we can see that it's branched to the right. It sent me a commiserations email. If we look at the number of points, I've scored 70 points. If we look at why I've scored 70 points, let's have a look at the filter array. So I got question 1 and 2 wrong. The third one I got correct, which gave me 30 points. And the fourth one I got correct as well, which gives me 40 points. So I got a total of 70 points. So we know that that's correct. And because I made a choice of 3 answers, I got a false, and therefore, of course, I didn't score any points there. If we jump into the multi-choice explained, we can have a look at the different choice, different order, and same case, same order. And of course, because I chose different answers from the correct answers, everything evaluates to false. But where we'll see some differences is in the next form submission that I do, where we'll see that the case and the order is very important when it comes to comparing our arrays of answers. Jumping into my email, we can see we have the commiserations, and you have not passed on this occasion. Your score was 33.33% because I got 2 out of 6 and I had 70 points. With my flow in test once more, jumping back onto my form, I have demo pass and I've answered all of those questions correctly. If I submit that, jump back over onto Power Automate, and again, if we pop open that multi-choice explained, you'll see that for the different case and the different order, where I've specifically reversed the order or I've tried to compare the array where we've got lowercase strings with the uppercase strings, it's evaluated to false. But where I know that I have the same case, because I've been very specific about the values within my composed correct answers, and I have the correct order because I've used sort on both the A6 and also on the response that comes back from the Microsoft form, we have true. And of course, it's that true value that I'm using within my compose answer check. In terms of points, I've scored a full 250. In terms of percentage, I've got 100%. If I jump into my email, I get a congratulations email. I've passed with flying colors. My score was 100% with a total of 250 points. So things to consider when you're building this, remember that the equals are based on comparing strings, so the strings need to be identical, and so you could potentially use the expression to lower, and that will enable you to convert the strings all to lowercase. So you'd wrap, for instance, your answer A1 into lower, and you'd also wrap your response from the form into lower also, so that you're getting both of those lowercase values compared. The other thing to note is if you have any trailing spaces at the beginning or at the end, you might also want to use trim. So trim, if you insert that at the beginning and the end, that will remove any trailing spaces at the beginning or the end of the string. So if you're getting any funny results, it's worth knowing these tricks, knowing that you're comparing strings, they must be the same case, and if you've got any trailing spaces, have a look at that trim expression. So that marks the end of the demonstration. We could have taken the array that had the true or false for the answer and the score a little bit further and maybe even include the question, the user's answer, and possibly even an emoji with a tick or a cross, depending on whether the user got the answer correct or not. The advantage of doing that, of course, is with an array of data, you can then create an HTML table, and then you can send that HTML table along with the summary to let them know how they did. The other thing to note is that forms are not very dynamic. Once you've created them, you have to then update them if you want to add additional answers or questions. And that's very much why I explored the concept of building a Power App quiz. And I do have a video from a couple of weeks back that's worth looking at, and I'll probably extend to show you how you can build multiple quizzes in a Canvas app using a SharePoint site where those questions and answers are dynamic. So as always, I hope you've learned lots from my demonstration. If you haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Bye.